Welcome everyone. Welcome to Rethinking Balance Sheets, and it's Friday morning actually, and we're back. And just to kick off, we will start with our customary Nicole. So here's Nicole. Welcome everyone to Rethinking Balance Sheet, and joining me as always on a Friday morning after your good cup of coffee and a nice breakfast is Ravi from Sage Tree Capital. Ravi, welcome to the show, and always glad to have this dialogue. Some people say very technical dialogue. You guys talk deep numbers and balance sheets. What's that? I haven't understood what a balance sheet is, but to be fair, it's a practical show on how we can understand balance sheet, which is an important part of any business. Understanding profit loss, understanding how you can manage your cash flow, how you can kind of overcome some of the key issues in this time of crisis for many, I think. So, Ravi, your thoughts for the morning as we kick off this show? What we're going to talk
Morning,
about?
Roshan. Good to be on the show. It's good to be here every Friday morning. We had a public holiday yesterday, so I think it's a nice respite
Yep,
morning.
yep, and we'll be having a Labour's Day tomorrow. So it's laborers or labor. All of us should take a break. Bharat Avalani joins us. Bharat, welcome. Good morning. You're in for a treat today because Ravi, who do we have today joining us?
Yeah, we've got Mr. Jeyaratnam from Singapore, venture capitalist, but and also someone who's got years and years of experience working in multinationals, been on the tech scene, been on the innovation side of things. So I think it's going to be a great show. And I think again, I always find it fascinating when I go down to Singapore. Obviously, we haven't been down to Singapore for more than a year with COVID, but fascinating in the scene happening in Singapore on venture capitalism and innovation. So for the rest of Asia who's joining into the show, great chance to learn more what's happening in Singapore. But just to go back to the last two shows that we had, gems of knowledge shared. Even for somebody like me in the corporate finance world, when last week's guest said for R1 million and less than 6 months, you can get yourself listed on Bursa, which is a major exchange in Asia.
Yep.
That just blew my mind out. So do tune in. You never know what's the next gem of
Yep, yep, and that was interesting for a lot of smaller businesses, right? There is an opportunity to list yourself on the lead market potentially, and Wong and his team, I think, are ready to help if there are those. So you can go back to your previous episodes, just check it out on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can access them.
And keeping it simple, the week before, Devin shared, you're sick, go see a doctor. Don't feel embarrassed. Yeah. So again, so go see SDRS and so on. And Sage Tree says we're willing to help anybody who wants to call us in. Share some time, pointing them in the right direction. So again, I think each show is having some moments which are really useful to people out there, and the feedback I'm getting is solid as well.
All right, so let's get our guest from Singapore in. So today is going to be about Singapore and some of the ecosystems in Singapore. Welcome to P. Jeyaratnam for joining us today. Chairman and CEO of S&J Asia Pacific Ventures. So Jaya, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you with us. Maybe you can share a little bit about yourself and do a quick introduction to yourself.
Okay, good morning to you and all the viewers. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be on the show with you guys. My background was I worked with multinationals, but initially went on an exchange program to Sweden through an organization called ISAC.
Wow. Okay. Yep.
And that was in 1978, so it gives away my vintage. And it was a terribly critical moment in my life because it was an eye-opener and a long link with Sweden. At that time, Sweden was unknown to this part of the world, and this part of the world was unknown to Sweden. And I remember having to stop the international department where I was attached to a headquarters in Stockholm of Electrolux from working, to give them an idea of what life was out here like, that we were not one large paddy annexed to China. We were not living on trees. And the only material I could get was from Singapore Airlines, their office, and from the EDB. There was a gentleman who spent many decades there called Gong Wee Lik, who became a good friend. And I screened these two filmlets, and that was quite an eye opener for a lot of them. But you couldn't get. The incredible thing about moving from Singapore to Sweden was that it opened my eyes. I was just completed my second year at university, so it gave me a very practical orientation of what the challenges of working life were like. And before I went, I spoke to the MD of Electrolux in Singapore, who is based in Malaysia now, Gunnar Broberg, and said, I'll come in for free to just spend time in your company to understand what it's like to be a subsidiary out here in the Far East. And as a consequence, they offered me a job 1 year before I graduated, and so did Electrolux in Sweden. And because of my involvement in Isaac, I got job offers from Shell, from Mobil, and from Citibank. But selfishly, I took the Swedish offer because it gave me an excuse to go back to Sweden, which I did like 4 times a year for 10 years. And I've still kept that link going with them.
Fantastic.
And yeah, I went into advertising, management consulting. Management consulting again with a Swedish company. We did work for HDB and Singtel, and we were instrumental in turning around Scandinavian Airlines from a huge loss to Airline of the Year. And they took a managing director from a local subsidiary, Linear Flick. And when they interviewed him, he wanted profit sharing. So the board asked him to asked themselves to be excused for a short while, because they were going to have a big laugh, because it was such a huge loss. What profit sharing is he talking about? But he actually turned it around and made a profit. And he wrote 2 fantastic books called Tear Down the Pyramids, where we traditionally have the hierarchical organization, which is like a triangle, which is peaked on top and broad at the bottom. He threw that away and just worked on 2 concentric circles where top management was in the center, no middle management, and a direct link with the front line. Why did that happen? When he took over Scandinavian Airlines, a lot of the World War II pilots and Air Force people were there. They formed middle management, and he said they kept themselves busy by CMA, or cover my ass notes, that filtered to the top, the front line, and from the front line to the top. So he got so fed up with it, and they were blocking him all the way, that he moved his office to the airport and dealt with the pilots and the frontline staff directly. If the plane took off a couple of minutes late, he wanted to know why. And sometimes it was just informal arrangements, because they knew the courier guy so well and he was delayed in traffic, so they waited 20 minutes for him to arrive. Lots of things like that, informal stuff. And simple, sensical things like, if you arrive on gate 34 from Chicago, why should gate 35 be going to New York? It doesn't make sense, lots of things.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And the other thing that he did was Tear Down the Pyramids was one, and Moments of Truth, where he said that the frontline people, you can have a fantastic experience in a hotel, but if you're cashing out, if your bill payment before you leave is delayed and you're late for your flight, that spoils the whole experience. So it's a sequence of events, like in the bullfight, and your chain is as strong as your weakest link, so you've got to get that consistent.
Nice. So let's talk about Singapore a little bit. And it's a huge venture capitalist and innovative place. Obviously, we just had Grab, another unicorn that just popped out of there. Tell us, briefly, the broad ecosystem in Singapore, and share with us how maybe Singaporeans, or maybe not even non-Singaporean entrepreneurs, can tap into some of this vast funding, or even the non-financial assistance that are offered in this vast Singaporean ecosystem.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Grab, so I'll start off with that. As you well know, that the couple were a Malaysian couple who studied in Harvard. They met there. And then eventually, of course, they got together. And they tried raising the funding in Malaysia, but it was conditional on a number of issues. So they came over to Singapore, and Temasek put in money, and they got money from the Japanese and so on. And many enlightened institutions put in money with them. Today, they are going out to what do you call it, a spec
Yep.
in the US.
In the US, yeah.
Yeah, valuation has gone up to $40 billion.
That's right.
40 billion and multiplied to Malaysian dollars as 120 billion. And
Yeah.
if you look at the time span in which
160 actually.
sorry,
But yeah.
100, and you look at the time span in which they have achieved that and say compare it with Malaysian Airlines or something like that, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what Singapore tries to do is to be conducive for such entrepreneurs and innovative ventures to come here, and the funding ecosystem here has developed incredibly. In the beginning, I was involved with rollout of US venture capital like Ventana Capital, Hamilton Bio Ventures, and got Temasek to put in money with them, and so on and so forth, and learn the trade from them. But the level of experience and understanding that these guys from the US had was night and day. Singapore was very shallow in the 80s in this aspect, but a lot of government funding and incentives brought them these venture company capital companies to be set up in Singapore, along with a wave of family offices subsequently. And so the funding ecosystem is quite incredible and is absolutely grown. The assets under management in Singapore exceed Hong Kong now. So that is a definite boon.
I think the point of depth is critical, because again, it's not just it's when people don't understand, it's when anything in life, you got to be at least at 10,000 hours, or that magic 10,000 hours. So if somebody's really going to help you, you're absolutely right. The point is someone has to know the stuff really in depth before they actually bring help to your company, and when they bring in funding. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely, because the initial venture capitalists in Singapore didn't have the guts to put money on their own convictions. They were government linked, and they looked for a signal from the government to say put in the money here, there, or somewhere else. Because if it went south, then they said, "Oh, I just followed instructions." Didn't have the wherewithal to do it on their own. They didn't understand the business. But with time, the expertise has come in, and many of these guys worked in London, New York, wherever, and they gained that experience and then came back, or they got trained in the companies which they joined, whether it's Draper Fisher or whoever else, the big boys, or Sequoia, and so on. And Temasek itself has grown in competence over the years, and it was modeled after the Swedish Investor AB, which is the Wallenberg investment arm, which owns Electrolux and Volvo and so on.
That's interesting, because again that point of CYA and waiting for somebody to make that decision is something that we've got to grapple with. And I think early days when they talked about MSC in Malaysia, they always talked about the willingness to fail, right? And with a culture where you have corruption, is an issue. There's nobody's denying it even.
There's a question
out of the thing to make an investment. Then and in places like here, you got why is this guy fighting for this account so hard? It raises a lot of other nuances which you don't, and that's good to hear. Why a professional market like in Singapore is probably doing very well.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that both non-Singaporeans can also tap into, just like Anthony and Hui Ling did with Grab, some of these funding and non-financial assistance in the Singapore ecosystem, right? It's pretty much an open system, right?
Yes, it's a pretty open system, but I've got to qualify. They've been trying to attract talent from all over the world, and they've got about 15 million people on the wait list to come in for one reason or another. So, but some very interesting things. Yeah, their preference has been to give it, of course, to Singaporeans or PR. But if you come in with something very compelling, a new technology is going to make a difference, it's going to be innovative, it's going to create new value, certainly they will welcome it. But if you're a Me Too technology, no real traction, then it's unlikely that they're going to put the money. They will look at the team, the age of the players, what technology they bring to market, the patents they have, and so on and so forth. So that's how they go about it.
Okay, okay. There's a quick question from the audience, from Bharat. He in reference to your whole Grab sting, and he's asking is what lessons can Malaysian authorities learn from the lost Grab opportunity? So I think this one, maybe Ravi, you might want to jump in also. But I think his perspective is like, it should have been a unicorn in Malaysia, but instead it's a Singapore opportunity. So what can we on this side of the border learn, that to replicate some of the stuff that Singapore is doing?
I think, Roshan, like many things in life, policies take a long time to just to give a perspective of that 160 billion. The best Maybank has achieved on our own stock exchange is 100 billion. So actually, if you think about it, but it's the same in Singapore. I think the company which owns Shopee is the largest listing in the whole of Southeast Asia. It's also based in New York Stock Exchange or Nasdaq, I can't remember. It's a lost opportunity to have a huge a name which in theory is so well known in Asia should be listed here or listed where it started. But I think from government's perspective, policies take a long time to change. So a lot of them are still legacies from the 1970s, 80s, which are still going on to today. But the world's changing a lot faster. So if you want to, these guys which want to make tons of money, want to grow their business, because these tech companies, a lot of it is first mover advantage, scale, etc. So if you're going to be slow, people are going to look, there's this whole idea of globalization. There's a hungry market down south, and people have accepted they're going to go there.
Yep. And JR, maybe broadly, I know you have also been investing in certain companies, but maybe you could share with us some of the companies that, or at least broadly, what kind of companies are you would invest in, and what would be some of the key considerations that drive your investment decisions?
Yeah, I think we've invested in companies in Scandinavia, in the US. If you take one investment that we did in the US called Pulse, it was over $1 million US, and they were the ones who featured Tupac and holographically the whole concert, and they pioneered that concept. And they brought Michael Jackson to life after he had passed away and released a song he had never released. And as a consequence, they had 2.3 billion hits on their website, which was a world record. So it was a tremendous technology. And so we look at those kind of companies, innovative companies, creating new space, having good IP, patents. And very important is the management team, the dynamics within the team, and the leadership qualities of the management. And their age, the number of years they have left to make things happen, how cohesive is the team, and the technology involved, whether they've got patents on it. If they don't, do they have a first mover advantage, and do they have the wherewithal to make it happen? Very often we find that entrepreneurs who start up the organization may have an engineering technology background or a science background, and they may not be best suited to leverage and move the company forward. So then we bring in external talent to do that aspect of it. Singapore is very conducive on that score. Like, I'll give you an example of a company in medical technology called Tricog out of India, which has now become voted the startup of the year in India. And I brought them in because I sit on the MIT board in Singapore for SMART. SMART is the MIT Alliance in Research and Technology. And we have got, over the last 10 years, $2 billion, $1 billion from the government to the NRF, which is the National Research Foundation. And we are waiting for our next tranche of another $1 billion. And the government has been very happy with that, simply because The board is made up of commercially savvy people who understand business and can smell a deal a mile away. And we do evaluations. We give away grants of $50,000 for proof of concept and $250,000 to help them go commercial. And these are mainly coming out of the polytechnics, the universities, MIT, and very often it's industry collaboration with the university, which we like because there's a strong commercial attachment to it. And the likelihood of it going and becoming viable is good. So we've had about a dozen companies which have gone international, got subsequent financing. And as I said, the government has been very happy with our track record because we've made it happen. The government funds are very often run by very hardworking, honest bureaucrats, but they're not businessmen, so they're not entrepreneurial in nature. The civil service, you do not get rewarded for getting it right, but you're certainly penalized for getting it wrong. So what's the behavior pattern going to be? That will slowly change, but it'll take time. And I often tell the government, you've got to empower these guys and give them the right to be wrong. Because as a developing country in the past, we were great at execution. And we had a few good leaders who were able to take best practice from Japan, Europe, the US, and we were great at implementing it. And Ravi just now alluded to it as to why has it become successful here. The great thing in Singapore is that if $100 is allocated to a project, $100 goes to the project. And why do companies come to set up in Singapore? It is never going to be a big lucrative market, but it's an incredible showpiece for ASEAN and Asia, because they know if you've got projects in Singapore, it means that you have had credibility, your technology works, and it's been thoroughly evaluated. It's not because you're somebody's son or you've got influence and or you bribe somebody that you got the project. And very interestingly, many of the startups, they are often asked, what's your track record, what projects you have? If you don't have that, you can't get started. And it's ironical because if everybody asks that, it's a chicken and egg situation. Where do you start and how do you start? But in the last 10 years, the government entities like Singapore Power and Sembawang Corp and all the rest of it, they have been told to look at these technologies. If you see there's some efficacy in it and you partly believe in them, or you have a strong belief in them, give them small pilot projects, multiple pilot projects. And then if they do well, scale them up to bigger projects. It can be industry-wide. And only then will the local companies get traction. If the government and everybody says, what track record do you have? You'll never get track record. So that has been a practical evolution. And if I can go into another practical evolution, because you talked about ecosystems in Singapore. If you take MedTech, for instance, they are given the pilot projects, they go on to departmental projects, and then they go on to complete in the entire hospital, whether it's Singapore General Hospital, National University Hospital, and when they get the government hospitals, subsequently they try and they get the private hospitals, and then it gives them tremendous credibility to go global after that, because it's a very credible track record. Now, I mentioned TriCog, which does readings of ECG in the cloud. They've done the algorithms after studying hundreds of thousands of ECGs. Tremendous talent base, which is their engineers and technicians in India. And it goes to a panel of doctors who work 3 shifts of 8 hours in India. Not that it is terribly necessary, but people like a human interface. Then it comes to the doctor anywhere in the world within, say, 5 to 10 minutes of him sending the results. And they can accurately tell you, you've got a heart attack pending, you better get to hospital, or you're fine, whatever it is. Because 95 to 97% of GPs cannot read the ECG accurately. It's very technical and very nuanced. These people are able to do that. And so I brought them, for 7 years we've been running, and I'm on the steering committee of MTech, which is the technology conference. It's the world's leading disruptive and innovative technology, which if you've had in Singapore for 7 years, many Malaysian VCs and so on come to attend it on a regular basis. And we charge $2,000 for about 700 people who come from academia, from business, from the venture community, from private equity, and etc., the banks and so on. So it's a good mix of people, plenty of synergies. And I got this company to present at MTech. I stepped out the decision-making process because they were a portfolio company. And the board took a decision on their own independently, and they presented. And as it so happened, I will elaborate a little on SG Innovate in due course. The CEO of SG Innovate, Steve Leonard, gave the opening remarks, and I know him well because he sits with me on the board. And I said, Steve, I want you to stay till the coffee break and listen to these people. If you like them, I'll arrange them for them to have coffee with you. He stayed back. He heard their presentation. They loved it. He loved it. And immediately he put in $3 million, or shortly thereafter, after evaluating them, into the startup from SG Innovate.
Wow.
What's very interesting, he was head of ID, Infocom Media Development Authority. Then he got seconded to SG Innovate by the government. SG Innovate reports directly to the PMO, the Prime Minister's office. He has sorry, it was 300,000 that he put in, not 3 million. So he actually speaks to the Prime Minister himself personally, and they gave him a whole bundle of money to put into startups. Steve had the guts to take these bold decisions. And he's now gone on to head on Singularity University in the US.
Wow. Oh, okay.
Very reputable institution.
Fantastic. Yeah, it is.
Gives you an idea of the caliber of the man and the people that they bring in to run these operations. Because the talent locally was not quite there, but and the guts to take those decisions, this man had it. And so they've invested in a lot of innovative companies that have taken off nicely. And once you get involved with the Singapore ecosystem, it opens a lot of doors because there are lots of synergies and they are well connected globally. So that begins to happen. And so like XG Innovate, there are many other schemes, SG United, and these people also give you talent where they pick up 80% of the cost of an intern. Because with COVID, they were very worried that the new graduates from the polys, from the ITs, from the universities were not going to be employed. So rather than have the problem perpetuate, they took up the funding issue. And on that score, Singapore, for a small economy, has put in $100 billion of funding from the government, which is a lot of money. And the bulk of which, or a significant portion, came from our savings from investments. Very few countries have that. Most countries have to borrow. Their deficits are already bad, including the US and EU countries and so on. So who would have thought that somebody would have thought about it? Lee Kuan Yew did, and set aside money for a rainy day, and finally we are using it now.
So it's fantastic, and Bharat says inspiring to hear that government funds are run by honest, hardworking bureaucrats. Music to his ears, Yeah, Ravi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just I think there was a lot of stuff. If you ask me what's the nugget for this week's show, is definitely go and see somebody who can smell a deal. Yeah, and I think if you're a SME or you're an innovator and entrepreneur, I mean, after a while, you should be able to, in conducting a meeting, you should be able to go in 15, 20 minutes. As much as they're evaluating you, you just take a good hard look at the guys and the kind of questions they're asking you. Are these the bureaucrats or the guys, who can can smell a deal? And I'll go one step further. When you talked about the gentleman who's gone to Secular University in the US.
Singularity,
Secular University in the US. Is the guy is capable of making a decision, and it comes down to experience, instinct, and that's something it's tremendously difficult for a GLC, a state-owned enterprise, a bureaucratic organization to hire somebody like that to head a. So I think that's good.
Yep.
If you ask me again, about the differences, and when can we get to a point where we can appoint people and have the trust in them that $100 goes to the $100 in the project and make it happen, then you can get the kind of results that you're going to see in markets which are successful, be it in Scandinavia or in Singapore or in Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Yep. And this is an engaging conversation. We're not going to end the conversation. We're still going to continue. But since we're talking about Singaporeans and Singapore, and they love their Hokkien, so we're going to just take a quick 30-second Hokkien break, and we'll be right back here in Rethinking Balance Sheet. We have P. Jeyaratnam here with us, with Ravi Navaratnam. It's going to be engaging. So we're going to continue this conversation on Singapore, their ecosystem, and how we can take advantage or leverage some of these opportunities in Singapore. So here's to Nicole in Hokkien.
Jackie 啊，你有冇聽啲咧叫 app 叫 Nicole 咯
？Nicole 是做乜？
唔是啦，我教你講 app 啦嘛。嘅你看啲 Nicole 你看，依家了後真正係 article、podcast、courses 嘅啊。我教你講啊，你變後面啊，你後面啊。
愛後面啊，定啲
你愛吞你喎。
吞這類咯。
啊，所以啊，你特別 Nicole，真係說你睇啦，你看誒 article 嘅了，睇啦，你變真搞嘅知無？
唔嘢無，我看啲。
有年你看啲 article 看按在後面啊。按照攤這類，哇！哎呀，你講他，
一日看好了嘛，真嚟就搞。
有啦，咁你講你嘛，你咪聽，當見到特別去看，特別看㗎了，
拍㗎了。你講你正搞啦，我
OK， 好，你先好嚟。
Welcome back to Rethinking Balance Sheets. I'm here with P. Jeyaratnam and also Ravi Navaratnam. We're talking about the Singapore ecosystem, and we're talking a little bit about investment into companies. And I think you shared a lot of nuggets in terms of what kind of leaders you're looking for, in what kind of organizations that you would invest in. I want to talk a little bit about smart money, if you can, Jaya. Because we talk a lot about not just getting money as companies, but also getting smart money in terms of not just helping them to be a provider of capital, but also there's marketing strategy, networking. And so how do businesses engage and enable us to access this smart money, and how I mean, what advice would you be giving us in regards to smart money, Jaya?
Well, the term has come up more of late, but its history goes back to 1695, it actually started with gamblers who had inside information and knowledge of sports tournaments and so on, or games, and then they invested where their information came from. It could have been horse racing, it could have been football, whatever it was, and then that got translated to investment, where the entrepreneur knows the terrain, has the experience, the knowledge base, and an understanding of the ecosystem around it. When you say smart money, then you think of the opposite, which is probably dumb money.
Stupid money, yeah.
That's more traditional money, where they park the money, expect a return, and they do not support you or monitor or mentor you as such.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas smart money gets more involved, mentors the company, opens doors, which is what many new startups are looking at. They are saying we are looking for smart money. By that same token, you must allow a liquidation of some of your shareholdings. That goes without saying, because the moment you take in capital, you're compromised to that extent, and a certain amount of involvement, and you must be open to the involvement. How the involvement translates will depend a lot on where that smart money is taken from, and whether that venture capital company or investor is somebody who's broad-based, understands the ecosystem well, is of a facilitative nature rather than someone who's an egomaniac and wants to control, and then it takes away the motivation. Very often startup companies get taken into large MNCs and they die a natural death because the entrepreneurial spirit is lost altogether, and that's killed. That's very critical. Yeah.
That point of entrepreneurial spirit, yeah, I think that's critical. You can't take in money and have that destroyed by bringing in new money. I think that's a critical key takeaway, Roshan.
Yeah. So what would be some key considerations? I mean, as both as an investor, as a person looking for the investment, what kind of analysis would you be doing in terms of looking out, seeking out where to invest smart money, so to say, that as a company that's seeking for investments can look and say, this is how we kind of pull together a value proposition to our investors also, and give them access to investing smartly,
Yeah. There in the Singapore context, since we are talking about it,
Yep.
there are buzzwords currently, like in most investment areas, and they happen to be digitalization, AI, data analytics, security, and
Yep.
these areas. Now, it is much easier to get government funding in such areas because they are the priority and the flavor of the month, as it were. And you go into those areas, but and it's something that, for instance, there's been a lot of investment in fintech, but I've stayed away from fintech simply because I don't know the area. So I couldn't value add to the companies that are in that area. But having said that, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, which traditionally was a tough, conservative central bank, which looked after all the banking in Singapore and did a good job. But in the last 10 years, they've taken a much more liberated view. They knew that the Bitcoins of this world could fly or be lemons and could be embarrassments. They would never have allowed them to set up here, but they did. And they also created a lot of sandbox situations for these companies to come and do work here, and for quite a bit of smart money to come. And I think we've got one of the best ecosystems for fintech in the world in Singapore now. And the reason they've done that is they don't want to be laggards when the banking system goes through a revolution. They want to be in the thick of it, and they want to be part of the solution and not, bury your head in the sand like many of the older bankers do, and then after wonder what happened. Because you have to have that mindset of a young, technologically savvy person to know what's happening in the space and be a part of it. It's not fully evolved. It's a work in progress. But I think this is indicative of some of the risk-taking that's happening. And some individuals have been given that right. If you take Philip Yeo, for instance, in the EDB, he was empowered, but with the overview of the financial genius that was Goh Keng Swee. And so he did a lot of things which a normal civil servant would not been allowed to do, and made it happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think reading Philip's book is incredible. Neither civil. Oh, I can't remember.
Neither civil or civil. Yes.
Yeah,
And
neither civil nor civil. Fantastic book on how to transform a country and take it to the next level. Yeah.
Yeah, he gave an example of his meeting with Lee Kuan Yew, who called him in for a meeting, wanted to develop Woodlands, which is in the north of Singapore, and said, what would it take to move industry and workers there? And the meeting lasted less than 2 minutes. He said, give me an MRT station, and then he stepped out. And LKY did that, and he moved Baxter and a whole lot of other companies to Woodlands and made it happen. But that's the kind of seamless thing that happens here, because if you look at Singapore, it has nothing, zero in the way of resources. The only thing it has is the human resource. And very early in the day, they realized that you do not neglect women because they constitute 50% of your human resource. And that is significant. And they've and this is the only value add we have that distinguishes it and gives us a differentiation and a value add.
Perhaps, Mr. Jay can also look at it is, as we're running towards the end of the show, I think still, I mean, if you're, come from wealth, with due respect to Grab, you come from an extremely wealthy family. You know how to access Singapore, you know how to access give a global outlook from the Tanchong Group. But let's say you're Malaysian, you've got a great idea. You've had not, but maybe have a second opinion. Could they come to SJ and yourself, Mr. Jaya, to actually get some insights, and maybe we can have a contact detail, something that we do on the show, get the guest to put in help to help those, looking to raise money, rethink their balance sheets, not just being limited to what they can do here at home in Malaysia or Jakarta, but, what is a first world environment in Singapore. Is that something that we can seek your assistance?
Yeah, one of my 3 core areas is rollout, and I've done this for companies from US, Europe, Malaysia, India, Japan. Is they seek our advice to help them raise funds and get set up in the market. I am a 3rd generation Malaysian Singaporean. My parents came over here. I studied here, did my university, national service, and so on here. And I've been active in many organizations, like I mentioned earlier. And so you have the contact base and the network to make it happen, because, the old school network and is very significant. And that's the reason why I continue to stay in Singapore and operate out here, is because you know the operators, and who, as I always say, the guy who cheated you in marbles in school will still cheat you in business. So, that means you can't have a beer and go out for dinner with him, but you won't go to bed in business with him. So I know the ecosystem, and in many cases, if you go to a new country, you see all the guys in their 40s and 50s have cleaned up the act. You don't know the interim in between. I know the system here and the people, so that makes a difference. But that's going to be coming to an end, not too distant future, because classmates are due for retirement, and many of them are retiring.
And we have a question from someone in the audience. Arvin Padmaraja says, here's a question: Malaysian companies view startups as mere development houses to build them digital products. Instead of working with these disruptive startups to evolve their business model, they end up absorbing the startup, killing it in the process. And I think this is not just a Malaysian issue, right? It happens in many countries. Startups shouldn't be solving the small problems of smallish Malaysian companies, but should be solving global problems instead. So here's a question to you, Jaya. How are Singaporean companies engaging with the startup ecosystem to deliver real value?
Sorry, the last point. How?
Is how so his query is Malaysia has this problem. Is this similar in Singapore? And is the Singaporean companies really engaging with the startup ecosystem, and is there real value being created, or is it just like Malaysia, where ultimately it becomes absorbed into the company's ecosystem, and then they lose that big disruptive global opportunity?
Yeah, it's tough to be big disruptive global. You start with a local value add and then try and globalize it. What is incredible is a closed economy to a large extent until recently is India. We are involved in 3 funds in India.
Okay.
And the level of talent that is coming out of there is just incredible. And they're looking at global, and we often draw them out to Singapore to use Singapore as a base to go global. On the ecosystem here, we've gone through those difficulties, and the government entities and other bodies. If you take, for instance, Block 71, which is a spin-off of NUS Enterprise, started small Block 71 was the name of the block where these traditionally JTC flatted factories were located. So now it's got a fantastic ecosystem of VCs and startups there. And, it evolves from the university, and they have collaborations with government, with private industry, and so on, and mentoring. And they have the global network. For instance, Block 71 is in Singapore, of course, San Francisco, Suzhou, Jakarta, Bandung, Yogyakarta, Saigon, and Nagoya. Their entry into Indonesia has been incredibly successful. There's a lot happening there. Don't forget, there are 260 million people, right? And they are slotted in 2050 by, I don't know whether the PwC or KPMG report to be the number 4 economy in the world, and that's
that's right.
the numbers, right? So it used to be not sexy for Singaporeans to think and go to Indonesia,
Really.
but you cannot ignore their size and potential.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
So yeah,
True,
so
true, true.
there is this ecosystem where they work and they make it happen. Yeah, and when you mention the IPOs, companies get acquired for 2 reasons: either because they think that they can value add and grow uh, the investment, or they acquire to be killed so that they don't
Yep.
become a competitor.
Yep.
Maybe if
Understand,
I can just
understand.
add to that point
Sure.
that Arvind was trying to raise. My own take when I've been to conferences in Singapore, and the example in India is an incredible one. I know when I went to MIT, when Bursa sent me, and it was actually there, and we went to give. I mean, we actually presented there, and we gave some ideas of working with Euronext. That was a Malaysian model, try to build a joint venture, and then try to develop technology for the rest of Southeast Asia. But the guys who came from the Bombay Stock Exchange, they were there a week before the conference. They were there a week after the conference. They had an incredible idea. They were going to go and sell their services to multiple exchanges in the US. Very different outlook. But I can also say the same a little bit about Singapore in terms of solving global problems. At least maybe about 10 years ago, I went up to one of they had the Facebook guy there, and they were looking at having a high level pitch. But a lot of the companies, because Singapore is so small, already by nature, think, how do I sell this into China, or how do I sell it into the region? Very different from what you see here, which is very much a local approach.
Yep. And we have to probably wrap up in a bit, but I have to mention this. You were named Swede of the Year award and given this award of a lifetime achievement for bringing in Swedish industry to Singapore and Asia. And I know you wanted to talk about this whole unicorn, the big $1 billion unicorn conundrum, right? Maybe you can share very quickly your thoughts on this the unicorn situation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. For those not so familiar, unicorns are those that get a billing of $1 billion of valuations, and the scene is exploding in China and India. They're creating unicorns like you won't believe, and but the small countries that I've been familiar with in Scandinavia, namely Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, Sweden has a population like 10 million.
Yep.
Finland is 6 million, like Singapore. But they have a world presence in industry, which is incredible. And they have an ecosystem for startups. Now, they are no more a long time ago relevant to the MNCs. Like Singapore is no more relevant because you're no more cost effective. You're becoming a more expensive player. They would gravitate to China and Vietnam and now India to some extent, wherever the costs of production is lower.
Yep.
But what has happened in Sweden, for instance, Finland and so on, is that the startup ecosystem has got going and is the main employer. And per capita, they have a higher concentration of unicorns, like the Skypes and the Spotifys of this world, than if you take the US or Silicon Valley. So that is quite incredible, and that is the future, and it's what Singapore is also trying to do. The reason I got that award it's an outstanding achievement award in Swede of the Year was the first time they gave it, and it's because of my long association with Sweden that goes back to 1978 when I went initially as an exchange student. Worked and lived and studied there. I was attached to Handelshögskolan, which was their leading business school, and then subsequently worked with Electrolux and Volvo and with Indovo Consulting, which was Sweden's companies. I helped the Volvo agent here expand into Burma, Vietnam, and China. And I'm active in the Swedish chamber of commerce, SwedeCham as it's called. It used to be Business Association of Sweden, and they have an economic arm with the embassy as well. And I've been close to all the ambassadors in the past, and very involved with all the programs that they mount and run. And there's been both Singapore and Sweden hit above their weight class in terms of being small countries but having a more than equal share in say and impact on the global economy. So they share a lot in common, and in terms of operating environment, they're quite similar. And the nice thing about Scandinavians, they're pretty straightforward. What you see is pretty much what you get, and they don't hide behind a ton of legal documents, which you get with the US these days. And their intention is to, when they engage with you, is, are you interested in making it happen? Not to hide behind legal documentation, what you can get away with legally. So there's a moral component to that. And they're not a particularly religious people or anything, but there's a strong moral component that can be relied upon.
Fantastic. Ravi, your final thoughts before we...
I think
Yep, go
that
ahead.
that whole conversation about Scandinavia is one that you want to think about it. But this whole idea of we talk about very small balance sheets going into the billions. Yeah, this is really where innovation and stuff like that comes in. I know there are a lot of friends out there running companies which are innovative. But like I said, maybe Sweden is something else you can look at. Scandinavia is something else you can look at. But for the moment, my view is Singapore offers a tremendous opportunity. That's why we got Mr. Jeyaratnam onto the show. He's well networked into Singapore. I think we will try to put up his contact details later. No, there it is. It's out there. So if you're actually thinking of, you've had a try in Malaysia and it's not going anywhere, get a second opinion. Get a second. Try to see the guys who can smell the deal, as I said, and make it happen for you.
And with that, we're going to end with a short Labor Day video, a little skit by our team. Take rest, a field that has rested gives a bountiful crop. So hopefully each and every one of you will have a happy Labour's Day tomorrow. I guess we get the weekend to rest ourselves. And with that, our producer will just shoot that. Wishing you all of you a fantastic weekend.
James, what about the rambutan commercial?
Done.
Very good. What about the egg video promo?
Siap.
Wow,
Siap,
well
siap, siap.
done.
Siap.
What about this last part?
Kau team.
Wow, well done. What about the Monday project?
Monday
Monday
planning
project.
Might be the client.
Better answer.
Hello? Yes, boss? Monday planning project? What?
What happened?
Have a great weekend, everyone, and goodbye. We'll see you next week, next Friday, same time, same place. Rethinking balance sheets.